Beautiful. We'll see. So it's FreeBSD based as the underlying operating system. So um, if you're familiar with FreeBSD at all, it's already not a very good uh, Linux distribution in terms of its user interface with a lot of those things. So it comes with that, and then it's built on top of by Netgate, which is the company that owns it. It gives it its own feel, which is essentially just FreeBSD with scripts with and PHP on top of it. So a lot of fun. So how do you use it? So there's two primary ways to use it. You can either access it through the web, so just find one of the interfaces on your router, which is usually going to be given to you in the packet, and then type it into a web browser. Just type the IP address in. It'll bring you to a login page. If you have little to no experience with pfSense, this is going to be the way you access it. It's very easy to understand. Everything kind of walks you through all that. The other one is going to be console or SSH access. So this one's a lot more difficult because you have to go through all the things with command line. A lot more can go wrong, but you have a lot more freedom to access things if you want and feel that way. So the web GUI, like I was saying before, all you have to do is have some way to be connected to one of the NICs of the pfSense box. So sometimes your NIC will be publicly facing, so you can just go online on the web and there you go. You can access it from wherever. A lot of the time, especially in competitions, it's private, so you'll use one of your LAN boxes you have in order to just access it, in order to access the GUI. So you just open a web browser, just type in the IP address. You will be met with a login page before this. And the login page, default creds in it are just admin pfSense. They're really creative. So once you log in, you're met with this dashboard. There's going to be probably a few different things that are going to be apparent here. So you'll have the interfaces. It's kind of whoever set up the pfSense itself will have different dashboards and things like that. So one of the first things you're going to do when you gain access to the box is change your password. Please, for the love of God, change your password. It tells you if your default password is incorrect and not working, and it will just have a warning, like back on this screen. If you see at the top, it just says, hey, it's set to the default value, and it'll just bring you right to the page in order to change it. Yeah, immediately change that password. I will be aware about an hour into the comp, I go in when I'm red teaming, I SSH in. If I can SSH in with default creds, I go into the command line and I just turn off your WAN interface. And then you have to deal with the consequences of that for the next 20 to 30 minutes. Because I would just keep doing it if I still have access. So change that password. If you don't, it's just going to be really annoying for you until you change it. How do you change that password? Well, pretty simple. You go to System User Manager. So pfSense in the web GUI has a lot of different options at the top, like system, diagnostics, things like that. So you click that, it's just a drop-down menu and you'll get met with a lot of different pages. So here you just go to the User Manager. Here you see admin, which is the user you typically log in with. And depending on how we feel on red team, there may or may not be a red team user sitting there for you to mess around with. You just click the little pencil icon. It's going to be for edit. You get brought in. Here you see it's defined by system because it's the one that gets brought up immediately. You can't change the admin username in the password field. If you want to change the password, you just type it there and then confirm it. You can set it to expire. You can use custom settings, things like that. You can see that it's not a member of admins, even though it is the admin user. That's because it just by default always has like super privileges on the box, no matter what you do with it. So yeah, and then at the bottom of that, there will just be a save icon. You just hit save and it applies and it changes the password. It's that simple. It's really not that hard to change your password with pfSense. Next up, we have firewalls. So the primary thing you're going to be doing with pfSense is going to be setting up and locking down your network using firewall rules. So just all you have to do, there'll be a firewall tab at the top. You hit that drop-down menu and just go to the rules. It'll bring you to this menu here. So how do you manage the rules? So the two first buttons, the add buttons, you can either add a rule to the top of the list or to the bottom of the list. So how pfSense does firewall rules is it'll have the rules in order on this page, and it runs through them from top to bottom. So the first rule that's on that page is the first rule that gets checked. And it essentially, whenever a packet comes into your box, it runs through each rule and checks whether or not it applies to that. So if it's this rule here, it's just allow all. So any IPv4 packet that comes in is going to be allowed in no matter what. However, an IPv6 packet might not be let in. By default, if you don't have any rule specified there, it's just a flat deny, so no packets are going to be able to get in at all. Obviously, you don't want that off the beginning of the comp, so there will be an allow all rule there. Keep it there until you think you're good, and then you can change around and get rid of the rule after that. The second button allows you to click multiple rules and delete them. Pretty self-explanatory. Toggle allows you to either disable or enable the rules. So if you don't think a rule is working, but you want to keep it around still, you can just disable it instead of just fully deleting it, so you can mess around with it and not have to start over fresh. You can copy a rule, so that just creates a carbon copy somewhere, and then save is just any changes you make. So if you reorder them, you can just save that. Separator is just like a GUI thing if you want to make it look somewhat nicer. If you have that many firewall rules, you're never going to have that many where you need to use it. So creating a firewall rule. So the first thing you have to decide is whether or not you want to pass or there's three options: pass, block, or reject. As it explains pretty much in the action item, the difference between block and reject is that reject will always send the packet back to the beginning, while block will just drop it. So they will know that an attacker would know that if you're blocking a specific thing, or if you're rejecting packets, because they will get replies back from the box itself. However, if you just block it, they don't really get a reply, and it just kind of goes into the void. So a lot of the times you're going to want to just create a bunch of pass rules and then have that default deny at the bottom. You can disable the rule here if you want. You select what interface you want. A lot of the time it'll just be two interfaces, your WAN interface and your WAN interface. If you have a third one, which UB usually does, it's going to be called opt1, and that's just going to be your like DMZ or cloud quote unquote box. You select whatever interface you want to do. So firewall rules for pfSense, it's whenever a packet comes into the interface. So for WAN, if I'm sitting outside your network and trying to access in, I'm not going to be able to get in. But if you're inside and sending packets out, your packets will be able to get out. But a lot of the times packets return, and then from there, they won't be able to return back into your firewall rule because your firewall rule is blocking them. But you'll still be able to pass through on the WAN interface. You can select what address family you want. You can either do IPv4, IPv6, or both. 90% of the time, nobody's ever using IPv6 for competitions because it's such a hassle to set up. And then you can select your protocol, so TCP, UDP, ICMP, take your pick. The drop-down menu kind of shows everything that you want. You have your source and your destination. So your source, a lot of the time you don't have to specify, and you can, especially if it's on a firewall rule on your WAN interface, you're not going to really know who's going to be attacking it. But if you ever get an IP address from one of your team members about a red team thing, you can select that you want a specific IP address, and you can type it into that source address, and then you block that specific IP address, and it helps out a lot. And then destination is, so let's say you have a web server on one of your WAN boxes, so any HTTP traffic coming in, you probably want to allow just for that web server. You probably don't want HTTP traffic in general, you just want it just to that web server, so you know it's working. But you can't, red team might not be able to use web shells and such on other boxes that exist. So, saving your rule. At the bottom, once you're done writing it, you just hit the save button. And then after that, it'll take you back to the screen, but there will be a new option that's going to pop up. And it's going to say firewall rule configuration has been changed. Do you want to apply those changes? You just hit the green check mark, and then it'll work. And then in the background, there's a filter which is just pfCTL, which is the firewall rules it's working. There's just a page that essentially just refreshes it, and then it applies the rule that you wrote. That's all it does. It's nothing too complicated. Yeah, and whenever you save or apply, it automatically reloads it and refreshes it. But if you feel like yours isn't working, there's a page that you can go to on the status drop-down menu where you can just reload it yourself. A lot of the times you won't have to do this, but it's good to know that it exists. All right, so now we're shifting over to command prompt. So this is still in the GUI itself, even though it's a little deceptive, where you get access to the command line proper, but you don't have to SSH in. So as long as you're logged in with some sort of user, a lot of the times you'll be able to access this, and you can just run commands, download files, upload files. So a lot of the time, if I want to upload a specific configuration file, I'll log into a team's router GUI and just upload the file through there if they've kicked me out of SSH, and the file gets moved up, and then I move that file around to wherever I want because I can just do that through the command prompt of the web GUI instead of SSHing in and using that. I'm sure it's useful in the applications that pfSense is normally put in. However, for competitions, it's very annoying to try and blue team because there is no realistic way to lock this down outside of just disabling red team access into this GUI at all. And then finally, we have what I like to call bad Wireshark. So Wireshark is just a way to see the network traffic on one of your interfaces on your boxes. This is very similar to that. It's just a packet capture. You can configure what interface you wanted it on, filters, things like that. The issue is you just kind of have to let this run, and it kind of runs blindly, and then you stop it, and then you can save it and then open it in Wireshark in order to see what it caught. So it's kind of like you can use it after like 10 minutes of usage. You can't actively look through it that Wireshark usually does. So it's not as useful, but if you want to know what's happening on your router, it's going to be the best thing you're going to be able to do. All right, so moving over to the console. So a lot of the times you won't have just straight console access to this, which means you have like a GUI, quote unquote, for this. A lot of the times you'll have to dedicate one of your boxes in order to SSH in. You just SSH using admin at whatever IP address this is. So this one is 192.168.0.237. And then just enter the password. A lot of the times if it's default, then it's just going to be pfSense or whatever you've made it. As you see here, when you log in, you're going to be met with 16 options. And normally it's 16 options. Don't worry about the 17th right now. It's usually 16 options that you can, and then you just have to a prompt to enter whatever you want. So going through those, it's going to be, so option 0 is going to be log out. So if you've SSH'd in, this is the only real way to exit your SSH session. You can't just type exit in. It doesn't accept that as a valid thing. So you have to hit log out. Assign interfaces allows you to assign which NIC is the WAN and which one is the LAN interface. Set interfaces allows you to set the IP addresses of the interfaces itself. Number 3, it says reset web password, but that actually just resets the admin password back to pfSense. I don't know why they call it that. So if you ever forget your password but you're logged in, you could just do that and it resets it. 4 is reset to factory default. 5 is reboot your system. So if you ever make configuration file changes and want to restart it, you just do 5. 6 is to turn it off. I wouldn't recommend doing that. 7 is just a ping. It just lets you type in a IP address and it pings out. 8 is the shell, and we'll get to that. 9 is pftop. Pftop is, in my opinion, a better netcat. So if you want to see what connections are currently happening on the pfSense box itself, it's a really good way to see established connections and things like that. It also auto updates. So if you just have 9, if you just hit 9 and just kind of look at it, it's really useful. 10 filters logs. You're not going to be using this really. 11 just restarts the web GUI. Kind of just if something breaks, you can restart it, see if that works. 12 is a PHP shell. So if you know how to use PHP, I guess it's helpful. 90% of the time, nobody really does, so it's not super great. 13 pulls the newest update, which is probably not the smartest idea because it might break your box. 14 disables SSH. Probably don't want to do that because you're SSH'd in right now, and if you disable SSH, you're probably not going to ever be able to get back into that box, which is not ideal by any means. 15, if you have a config, you can restart using that, and then 16 just restarts PHP. Now, when you're in a competition, do not touch option 1, do not touch option 2, do not touch option 4, do not touch option 6, and do not touch option 14. 1 and 2, because you aren't allowed to mess with the networking anyways, and if anything, you're just going to break it. 4, I mean, you're resetting your thing to factory defaults. You're going to break everything the WAC team did, and your router's going to be down. And they're probably not going to fix it because you messed up. 6, you don't want to touch, because if you turn off your box and you don't have a way to turn it back on, you kind of shot yourself in the foot with that one. And then 14, as I was just saying, if you've SSH into a box, do not disable SSH, because you will not be able to get back into that box. This also goes for all the cloud boxes you guys will have. Don't do that, because if you disable SSH on your cloud boxes, there you go. You've lost access to it. As I said, option 8 is the shell. So this is just going to be somewhat like a Linux command shell. You are logged in as root no matter who you log in as. So if you use the admin user, you use any other user you've made, you get logged in as root. So you just run everything as root. You can treat it like a normal Linux shell. If you want to do text editing and things like that, be aware the only default is VI, which is a way worse version of Vim. User management is the same way as you would do FreeBSD. So passwd works, add user works, things like that. I would highly recommend you just mess around with it. So firewall rules through the command line. There's 2 ways. You can either do easy rule or pfCTL. Easy rule is essentially lets you do pfCTL commands without as much nuance as there is with pfCTL. So easy rule, you just do, if you want to block something, you just choose an interface and you choose a source IP. So if you know red team sitting on 10.1.1.1, you can just do easy rule block WAN 10.1.1.1. Pretty simple. Passing's a little more specific. You need to have the interface, you need to know the protocol you want to block, the source, and the destination of anything. You can put any for a lot of these. So there's that. And then pfCTL, the easiest way to do it is just write out a file and then essentially use that file to upload all your pfSense or pfCTL rules. This is an example of a file. So it's passing outbound packets on the egress interface using TCP from any port, from any source to any destination on ports 80 and 443. It's a lot more complicated than the easy rule, but it allows you to be a lot more specific and a lot more granular, which is very nice. So there's plenty of examples you can find online if you want to use this way. Some notable directories and files inside of pfSense is the etc rc initial. That's the 16 options you get out at the start, is the rc initial. So if there's stuff there that you think shouldn't be there, you might want to go investigate that. rc.anything there's a lot of stuff that runs on boot. So I would check there if you feel like there's stuff that's running on boot. User local www is all the files for the web GUI. So if your web GUI is getting messed up, it's probably located there. And then the cfconf.xml, that's the configuration file that the router pulls every time it restarts. And it just has every configuration. So having a backup of that might be important at some point. You might want to make a backup of that somewhere. All right, that's it. I do have one more thing to say. If you want to play around with pfSense, something I found fairly recently is the 2.7.2 ISO you'll find on Netgate is broken to the point where you can't virtualize it. it corrupts any hard drive you give it. So when you virtualize it in like VMware and stuff like that, or even on OpenStack, it will corrupt no matter how big and how many hard drives you give it. It just corrupts them all. So you should probably find a older version, like 2.7.1, and then just update that one to 2.7.2. I don't know why it's like that, but it's broken. Can't fix it. I'm not on that gate, so I don't care. So, all right, any questions? Will. What? Why are you saying that? No. No. I'm not answering that question. It's not. Next question. I'm not answering that. I don't know. What do they, Asa? No, because it's not a relevant question. I'm not repeating that question because it's not relevant. Any other questions besides Will? Besides Will? I don't like any of the three options that just raised. Asa! Okay, good job, buddy. Drew.
What happens if you flush all your rules or disable your packet filter when you're natted?
Well, kind of depends. So the question was, what happens when you flush all your rules or disable the packet filter? So disable pfCTL when you're natted. Depends on how Black Team has set it up, because sometimes flushing your rules is fine. However, sometimes disabling your rules are not fine. So it kind of depends. Black Team will probably tell you guys if there's a major concern of whether or not you should do either or. So just keep a mind out and just don't go around blindly running commands without making sure they're okay to run first. Always just ask. We'll be able to tell you guys for the competitions, because there are certain moments when if you, let's say, flush all your rules and you have a bunch of rules that help you when you're natted or double natted in some cases, all of a sudden all your traffic breaks. So you probably don't want that. So if you're curious, just ask Black Team. We'll tell you what you can and can't do. Any other questions? What's up, Eleanor?
So like the web GUI stuff,
Mm-hmm.
would it just like break the web GUI or would it like break the entire thing?
What do you mean by like do something to?
If you like deleted everything on that file
Okay.
or the web GUI.
So the question was, if you like deleted or modified a bunch of stuff in the web GUI, would it break the web GUI or break everything? So luckily, everything inside of the www directory just affects the web GUI. So if you delete or mess around with it or move stuff around, you'll notice it on the web GUI side. You won't notice it if you're SSH'd in. So a lot of things I do will be dealing with the web GUI itself. So you will very clearly notice when I've started to mess with it. However, it will still be functional, and you'll still be able to SSH in and theoretically fix it if you wanted to. So I think good. Will, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, if your pfSense is broken, what would be like the first thing you check? Like what's the most low-hanging fruit?
So the question was, if your pfSense is broken, what was the first thing you would check? Well, it depends on what. So I guess my first thing would be checking the WAN interface, making sure that's up, and then checking for firewall rules. Those are going to be the two biggest things that are the most extreme low-hanging fruit that exists. And that's, let me rephrase that. That's the things I do the most commonly. Is I will disable the WAN interface and or just put firewall rules up to block specific protocols and stuff like that. So, any other questions? Sure, go ahead. Nope, question. So the question was, how frequently is pfSense encountered outside of the competition? It depends. I mean, Netgate's not a small company by any means. They have a lot of corporate customers who interact with them a lot of the time. They have a lot of products as well that companies use. So I'd say they're not a massive market share, but they're not a small one either. So there's a chance that when you go out into the real world, there's a chance you will encounter pfSense somewhere at a company somewhere. You also have like Palo Alto and like Cisco and stuff like that. Those are obviously the more well-known. But I mean, Netgate's still a decent contributor to a lot of the networking equipment that's out there. Cool. Anything else? Now you can go, Will.